All right, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next panel is titled Asset Manager Perspective, Finding Alpha with AI. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage. And I'll hand it over to Ken, our moderator.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion. First, we want to give some self-introduction. Should we start from Anshul? Anshul, you want to talk about yourself briefly?
Sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Anshul Pandey. I'm the co-founder and chief technology officer of Accern. Accern is a no-code AI platform. We help financial institutions make sense of large amounts of data, whether it's structured or unstructured, discover insights, as well as identify potential risks. I did my PhD in computer science. That's when Accern idea basically started. And prior to that, I had some background in robotics and signal processing. So all of those tied back together, and really excited to be here talking about this very exciting topic.
Thank you, Anshul. That sounds great. So next, Ioana, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Ken. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. My name is Ioana Boier, and I'm the head of Quantitative Portfolio Solutions at Alphadyne Asset Management. I'm a quant researcher. I've worked on both the sell side and the buy side for many years. I have a PhD in computer science, and prior to coming to finance, I've worked at IBM Research at Watson Research Center for many years as well. And yeah, I'm excited for a great panel today.
Thank you for joining, Ioana. So next, let's go to Bob. Bob, you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Bob Gaines. I'm happy to be here. I run SambaNova's worldwide financial services practice. Prior to this, I led IBM's big data and AI practice for the Americas. And basically, what I really tell people is I helped Wall Street build smarter algorithmic trading models for a decade. SambaNova is unique. In fact, it's an AI innovation company. You know, basically, it was not just a point solution, but an open source stack that abstracts the complexity of the hardware. So when I saw what they had of accelerating quantitative workflows, I'm like, hey, I really think they have something. And I'll talk more about that later today, but thank you so much.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you, Bob. So next, Matthias.
Hi, good to be here. Excited to be here. I'm head of asset allocation at LTT Capital Partners. We are focusing on alternative investments based in Switzerland, but active throughout the world. And currently at the stage of recognizing the enormous value that data have, and we put in particular in my team focusing on concrete algos and ways of putting this to practice. And so happy to discuss possible ways to do this with you.
Thank you. Very nice to have you here. So I'll give a brief introduction about myself also. My name is Zhang. I'm the head of research technology data science at Morgan Stanley. We mainly support our research department by providing expertise in machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, big data analytics, and other AI techniques. At the same time, I'm also an adjunct professor at NYU, teaching a course called Big Data Analytics in Finance. So I'm very happy to be here and to be the moderator for this discussion. So now let's jump into our panel discussion. So this is the first topic. To start high level, what's your current view on AI in asset management? Is it inevitable that AI-driven shops will come to dominate? I'll ask probably Bob, given that you have a lot of experience in AI development. You want to start to share your thoughts regarding this topic?
Absolutely. So yeah, I spent a decade starting originally with high frequency traders and then just regular hedge funds on algorithmic trading strategies. And the real value isn't just trading faster. Everybody does that today. It's about the smarter models, and it's not just market data, but the vast array of data that's out there. So the companies that are like the lead in this industry, like the Citadels, Jump Trading, they have hundreds of petabytes of data, and so the real key is how to look for patterns, buying signals, trading signals between those disparate data sets. And for years, I know everybody says, well, AI is new to the capital markets group. I disagree. AI is a workflow. So think about what these guys did a decade ago. They would ingest a bunch of types of data, they would transform them, they look for trading triggers, they do back testing, they do simulations. And then when they found a strategy that worked, they execute them on FPGAs at the colos. So that's AI, if you think about it. They were training a model, and then they were running inference on it. So now we have much newer technology out there that allows us to make it even simpler and easier for people with the advent of new technologies. Originally, we started with x86s, then we're going to GPUs. And kind of what is unique, at least at SambaNova, is the fact that we took deep learning neural networks, convolutional and graph neural networks, and we parallelized them and put them on a chip. And so they're reconfigurable. And I'm like, wow, that will really streamline things, for clients. So the companies that can do that will generate, alpha. Think about the market in general. We have a low yield environment, so safe, totally risk-free environment. You're getting what, 1.5%? That's not very exciting. We have data assumptions, and we have delays in tactical decisions. And the asset group that might have been best performing last year and the year before, there's no guarantee it's going to be the best performing this year. I mean, in fact, the worst one last year was commodities, and it's the best one this year. So, it's, how do you look at all those parameters to build a model that can accurately predict and create an asset, allocation portfolio? I mean, I think AI is going to dominate in this industry.
Thank you, Bob. I want to echo what you just said. I believe AI is going to play a more and more important roles in asset management. But at the same time, I also think, it's going to be like a very efficient tool, right? But it's not going to replace all the human work. Given that, there are benefits about using AI, such as, extracting additional information from unstructured data or semi-structured data, or automating a lot of our current, manual work. And as you mentioned earlier, generating alpha, right? However, there are also a lot of concerns, right? So, for example, data quality, right? When you start to use social media data, open source data quality may not be guaranteed, right? And then the regulation or compliance will become more and more strict, right? So the kind of data source available now may not be available in a few years, right? So that's also something we need to consider. Yeah. And another thing I just want to mention is that the complexity of automating natural language processing, applications is a challenge, right? It's still early phase. We're doing a lot of NLP work by setting up rules or, setting up rules plus machine learning. But, in order to make it fully automatic, I think there's a way to go. There's a long way to go. Just my 2 cents. Yeah.
I think you're right. Data classification is key. In fact, I had one of my clients tell me once that they believe data labeling and data classification will become the next form of manufacturing, and that it's critical because if you can't build a model, if you can't find your data, if you don't know what's right. But I think deep learning, if you think about all the parameters that go into determining what a proper valuation of a asset price should be, look all the parameters. Well, that aligns perfectly to deep learning and perfectly to natural language processing. So obviously, I think it's going to be big, more as an augmented intelligence. It's not going to replace people, but it will help people make more intelligent decisions.
Right, exactly.
I would fully agree to that. Bob, also what you said about importance of models. If I can share our perspective a bit, models need to be understood, right? As an asset manager, we have a fiduciary duty towards our clients. And so we wouldn't put on a trade that we don't understand ourselves. So to me, making this step towards more complexity, maybe nonlinear relations, deep learning, that involves a tight control on what kind of behaviors you can guess without looking at the result of your computation, like having strong a priori expectations and then seeing them confirmed. That's a bit our gold standard when we adopt something. And obviously also what you said, that's still, there's a lot of work to do.
It's called data explainability. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, my camera just switched up. But
You're back.
Yeah, it's
you're back. Oh, good.
Yeah. No, it's being able to explain what's going on and not selling this as a black box, because that has been hindering the adoption of that first generation of smart devices. People like to know what's going on behind the scenes, even if there's a lot of technology involved.
I think I could also relate it back to so if you try to let's talk about NLP as a problem in asset management here, right? So let's say you want to build a model that extracts, say, sentiment or compute sentiment score on a 10K earnings report, right? Something like that, or an earnings transcript. I think if you really try to, if you look around, okay, how much label data is out there that you can really use? There have been promises on unsupervised learning, right? Andrew Ng has been a strong proponent around it. Jeffrey Hinton is exactly on the opposite side. So there have been lots of discussions around maybe you would not need lots of training like label data, but statistically, so far we have not found models that were unsupervised really performing really well in asset management as an industry. And that basically brings our focus back to the point on can we really adopt these models that are out there off the shelf right away, or is there that extra mile where you have to pre-train the model for your domain, your use case? And it's very interesting. We created at Accern one of the largest sentiment tagged sentiment corpus data set to train our models, and we keep doing it. We do it every couple of weeks. We update with additional changes and so on and so forth. And it's already the largest data set out there. So I think there are lots of interesting problems around data labeling, data quality. AI is a necessary but not a sufficient condition to be successful, right? So just because you used AI doesn't mean that it's going to do everything for you, but it is going to be the necessary condition to be successful, I think, in the future.
Yes, I can't agree more. Anshul, we experienced something similar, labeling records in order to train a supervised learning model. It's a big effort. There are some tools that help us to automate this process to a certain degree, but it's still early phase. We still have to manually label a lot of records in order to build robust models. So that's definitely one of the challenges we're facing. Sorry, Ioana,
No, not at all. I think it's all very interesting. So my personal opinion, and by the way, all my opinions here are my personal ones. I have to say that. Is that I guess in the short to medium term, this winning combination is human plus machine. I feel that we're still in this, what you guys were alluding at before, this style of narrow artificial intelligence that we have at our disposal, right? So I think on one hand, it's short-sighted to ignore the advantages that artificial intelligence and machine learning offer in I guess, targeted narrow use cases, so to speak. For example, I come from a discretionary background, right? So there's a very complex decision-making involved, high dimensionality search spaces, and so on. So having some ability to use some machine learning tools to help with that is definitely definitely helpful. But I think at the same time, it's a bit naive to think that with current techniques and what some AI researchers call system one techniques, we can completely ignore the human in this combination, right? So there's still a bit to go in terms of having machines have the ability to reason. I think causal structures are important especially in asset management, right? Not relying on very spurious types of correlations, right? So, and what Anshul was saying before, right? This notion of being able to train with either limited or no prior training data, I think that's still a way to go.
Totally agree. I also feel the same. There's no perfect model. Right? Most of the models were trained with historic data. And when you're doing either forecasting or nowcasting, you're trying to predict the future. But what if the future environment is totally different from historic environment? Your model will fail, right? So we need to take that into consideration, and instead of fully trusting any model, basically.
Yeah. So just go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go first. It's okay.
All right. So thanks for bringing that up, Ken. I mean, I had a very outsider's perspective when I started Accern, right? Like my background was engineering and like building robots and doing maths here and there. And then I was doing PhD, and now I was writing some algorithm that one of the buy-side firms liked, right? So that was the story of how Accern started. So it was very interesting to see that in such a dynamic environment, which is finance, essentially, a time series, data drifts happen here and there. Very few firms were really accounting for data drift-based performance decays, and how do you really update the model? And when we, for example, launched Accern in the early days, those were the questions. They're like, hey, how are you accounting for now Brexit happened in between? Now, are there coefficients? Should they be different now? And things like that. So in 2020, we finally released, we called it adaptive learning framework. So the idea was very simple. The idea was, I mean, intuitively it was simple. Technically it was complex, which was, can we build models that could incrementally change and keep accounting for like this data drift that is happening, but without full retraining? Because if you're training on petabytes of data that Bob was mentioning, you're going to burn your GPU resources there. So I think it is very interesting that some of these discussions are now popping up in this space. So
I talked to go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to stick in the idea that obviously the hope is that you would train the model on a limited set of labeled data, which you call your gold standards, and then do what they call transfer learning, or what is called transfer learning, which requires the model to be generalizable, which is what Ioana, you also said about finding the true causes rather than just spurious correlations. And that, I think we are still driven, maybe that's at least true for, people I talk to, by this hope that we can build machines that enable us to extrapolate, if only to discover or get new ideas about, useful models. So working on that is, I would say, one of the most exciting areas in AI at the moment, I think, which is basically research on how to constrain the model so that it doesn't overfit. An age-old task, obviously, to anyone doing quant research, but how do you do it with deep learning? How do you do it with these, very elaborate models with millions of parameters? How do you constrain them in a sensible way to fit a prior, or to, be general enough so that you can transfer it to a new regime or system? We'd be happy to hear that from an NLP perspective, because think of the data set on movie data, like sentiment on movie, that doesn't really work on finance data maybe you can confirm that, because it's such a domain-specific way of describing whether you like it, and then there's irony and there's many shades. So what do you extract out of language to make it work in the finance domain? Yeah, that's something we need to think about.
So that's one area we I'm sorry, go ahead. One area we excel in is natural language processing. So I talk with a lot of different financial firms, from small, algo shops to the big, too big to fail banks. And one thing that Anshul said, model creep is a definite issue. As the model shifts one way or the other, so you're always retesting it. And one advantage deep learning has over machine learning is that as I get more and more data, my models should get more and more accurate over time. Because of all my parameters, of all my inputs, I can adjust the weights. I can deactivate some, I can over accentuate the others to really get a better feel, because what I'm trying to do is understand and identify patterns that may be hidden. So we talk with a lot of customers. NLP, by far, natural language processing, with some of the more sophisticated models, BERT Large, GPT-2, now even GPT-3. We have a bank in Asia wanting to do GPT-3, not only to help in the asset management piece, but in the compliance piece, because compliance is nothing but millions and millions of unstructured documents, or one big bank looking to do counterparty risk. Think of all the parameters around counterparty risk and all the things that come into it, that I have to turn Brexit on. Oh, Brexit's no longer an issue. I can deactivate that. That's the whole advantage of deep learning. And it will be a hands-on augmented intelligence, meaning do not think this is a black box. This is a tool like a stethoscope. It will help you do the diagnosis, but we're still paying you, the doctor, to make the diagnosis.
Right. No, this is a great example, Bob. Basically, it showed us like one example about how to leverage AI in asset management. Anybody else would like to share some other examples based on your experience?
Yeah, I can add one. So there was, I think, so first is like amount of unstructured data. I think it's the most exciting time to be doing, I would say, NLP in this space. Reason being, the models are fairly now, I would say, robust. They do perform. If you train them well, if the data actually has patterns, there are good models that can extract some interesting insights. So what we saw also was going beyond. So with the whole ESG kind of a movement that's been going on, ESG investing and sustainable investing, SFDR with EU that's coming up, people are now also looking at, can we process this very large amounts of textual corpus and I identify new insights, right? So are there like these new emerging areas? For example, clean tech, it's a new emerging area, and you see some big companies are doubling down. And now you can cross correlate, okay, who are the suppliers of this company? And maybe those may get affected, or like who are the buyers of the products of this company. So we are seeing a lots of new use cases where people are now really creating these matrix and saying, okay, these 50 companies that are in my basket, in my portfolio, what are their exposure to now AI, to cryptocurrencies, to NFTs, to, and then that may not be just a single degree of freedom away. Maybe it's like 2 or 3 degrees of freedom away, because maybe that's because of a supplier which has another supplier, and so on. So we saw that recently, at least the use case requirement popping up since, I would say, the start of 2020, and it has now become one of our main use cases, like identifying new investment insights from text.
Very interesting. Yeah, I have a relevant project we did a couple of years ago. I like to share also. It's called Research Sentiment and Related Trading Strategy. So what we did is we analyzed our financial analyst sentiment based on the research report they published. We first want to try some open source sentiment packages or vendors, and we failed to find a good one. And there are a couple of reasons. One is that the sentiment is not as generic as social media sentiment, right? So sentiment for asset management is complicated, right? It requires domain knowledge to define the labels. And second, the traditional bag of words approach didn't work because the sentiment is often hidden in phrases or sentences. Right? So we need to find out a smarter way to do so. So we end up taking a two-step deep learning approach. We work together with our sector quant team and with a few of our financial analyst team to help us build a robust data set for training and validation. The performance was tested with multiple out of sample data sets and proven to be stable and good. We then work together with our sector quant team to come up with a trading strategy, which we did a lot of back testing, forward testing. It has been proven to generate alpha. And this, we published a few research reports based on this work. We got interviewed by CNBC News, Wall Street Journal, and we shared data feed with some of our clients. So I think this is one example to show how we can leverage AI or data science, machine learning, NLP techniques in asset management. Sometimes you cannot directly use some open source tools or packages. You have to build on top of them.
Yeah. True, yeah. I also like to think in terms of like more general taxonomies of use cases. So for example, categories like data augmentation or pattern learners, right? So I think on the data augmentation side, for example, there are a couple of things that have emerged recently, or maybe not, in the past few years. Like you guys mentioned a lot of NLP, so processing alternative data, right? So this is where whether it's text, speech, images, people start using those in addition to more traditional data sets. So definitely besides NLP, natural language understanding or computer vision are being used, but also for data generation, right? Like there's techniques now to learn these joint distributions from typically, unfortunately, still very large amounts of data. But this is in order to generate even more magnitudes, more samples from these distributions to feed to other, let's say, data hungry AI learners. And again, this is in the narrow sense. And then on the pattern learning side, right? So there's the supervised, which you've mentioned, and then the unsupervised, right? Like people try to learn these complex functions, approximate them with some neural nets. And then with the hope that either they get evaluated very fast once they're learned, or that they're able to predict future behavior. And then also coming from fixed income, I feel like there's a lot more in terms of asset classes, right? Like there's a lot more successful use cases related to equities. Perhaps also because of data accessibility compared to fixed income or derivatives like options, for example. And then, last but not least, I think in terms of life cycle, right? So this idea of pre-trade, execution, or post-trade. So these are all being touched now by AI and machine learning techniques.
Hey, could you add, I work with a lot of companies, and one area we do really well in is what we call true resolution computer vision, and it's great in life sciences. But in financial services, where do you think computer vision would play beyond just like the small resolution images from like check processing and things like that?
Oh, I think there's, it's still this alternative data space. I mean, people have been looking, for example, at images of parking lots to assess, how much success certain retailers have, or views from above in terms of oil tankers, or all sorts of things, right? Where people are trying to find creative ways, images of traffic. This is weather patterns, things of that sort, right? So there's a lot of foray into, I don't think, in my opinion, the incremental alpha is necessarily yet proven using these techniques, but there's certainly efforts in those areas.
Yeah, actually, thanks. So it's actually a personal pet project of mine. I used to have a boss years and years ago who said, "Oh, you can't get alpha from alternative data," but mainly they don't have the compute and processing infrastructure in place to be able to handle more than one type of data, cross-reference with market data. And so, yeah, really, that's why I, kind of ask about it. If, where SambaNova kind of came across was, hey, let's do these pre-built models where customers can bring their own data around high-res computer vision, deep learning recommendation, NLP, to make it easier to deploy and faster. And so my personal goal is to show customers they can, in fact, make alpha from alternative data, which is like a $6 billion industry. So
exactly,
and it's a
I would
strong
agree.
case,
Sorry, Matthias, go ahead.
No, it's just to expand on what has been already presented. I think the key potential in AI is that it can take all kinds of complex input, not just, think of the typical workflow has been, there's a time series, you do a momentum indicator, you enhance it a bit, and that's your trading strategy. Now here you can take distributions as inputs or find patterns in, very high dimensional spaces, like understand how asset classes co-move beyond correlation matrices, build a tree, plug it in, see whether changes in structure are predicted. I think there's a lot, which is possible now that that needs to be, looked at and explored by people that are trained to, formulate. And there's a lot of intuition needed to be able to pick the right inputs, given all these possibilities. Would you agree?
Exactly. I think this is a very good conclusion for the current topic. So let's now move to the next topic, if you don't mind.
Sure.
How does AI impact risk and return forecasts and constraints? This is also a very hot topic. I don't know, Ioana, you want to start sharing some of your thoughts on this?
Sure. So I guess I'm gonna address this from maybe two viewpoints. One is the classical, right? So the risk return, right? I guess the expectation is that the more risk you take, you expect a high return, right? And I think where AI is here to help is perhaps looking at not necessarily the validity of this, but maybe like how much risk you really need and eliminate the unnecessary risk for the same amount of return. And then the, let's say, non-classical thing is going more from an explainability perspective, right? Like you guys mentioned this earlier, but there's this notion that we as people, right, we kind of trust our gut and our experience to take on risk. And like I was saying before, we rely on certain patterns that we observe that could be correlation based and may break, right, and have broken. But at the same time, when it comes to black boxes that give non-intuitive answers, it's hard for us to trust those, right? So I think explainability, transparency are vital in this risk management context. And then the last thing I'll mention here, I guess, is responsibility, right? So who does the responsibility lie with when the AI comes into play, right? Because I guess is it a human or is it the machine? I mean, the extreme case is that of the self-driving car, right? But in finance, it's still a lot of responsibility when money is lost. So if that's driven by a machine, like who's responsible? So that's my view. I think this is how things change, and there's a lot of questions to be answered in this space.
Those are great points. That also reminds me, I believe AI can help identify risk in alternative data such as text, right? So by applying machine learning plus NLP, you may be able to identify certain terms or entity classes and conduct classification or clustering documents and identify risk, such as credit risk, for example, right, or market risk. However, I totally agree with Ioana. The models themselves, right, could be a risk factor, right. Black box is one thing, right. Even for the simple models, right. How can we guarantee, it's not produce additional risk? That's also something we need to control. There have been more and more regulations on documentation, machine learning, and AI approaches. I think there are going to be more and more mature requirements for data scientists or AI, experts to, design and develop AI applications along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I could add, so there are lots of discussions. I mean, we as a software vendor, right? We hear lots of these requests from our clients. Now we have to find solutions because we have to sell a product, right? If we don't find solutions, we won't be able to sell it. So there have been, at least we are getting more insights into what are the most immediate set of things that they have requested. So for example, you gave, let's say the system said, on the ESG factor, this particular company has the health score of this, right? And the same way you could have pinpointed on a structured data and said that, hey, this particular column, that was the value, and that's why my rule says that the health score should be less than 20. How do you do that thing on text, right? Like, and then going beyond just a keyword or a phrase. So we did something to basically extract the exact statement from the text and from which document that the model had reference to come up with a specific score. I think on the other side, we also see these regulatory agencies getting involved, which I think is going to start to define the standards for MLOps. And how do you, I think by the time, in like a couple of years, I would say like you may actually have very, very standard specifications on what a trusted ethical AI setup or a system looks like. And then that adoption in the portfolio risk or in the risk classic risk and reward assessment might actually be quite valuable. So I know like IEEE has recently come up with a playbook for trusted AI in finance, right? And it does highlight, okay, for which kind of use cases, what things you have to account for. And now they're coming up with MLOps standards that we are contributing to as well. So I think a lot of those explainability piece, a lot of those black box and how do you unbox it, and where do you involve human in the loop in making the decision, a lot of those things we are seeing regulatory agencies trying to tackle at the policy level itself.
Just one oh, go ahead.
No, you go. Sorry.
Okay, so what I was going to say is that AI gives and I'm talking really deep learning AI, gives visionary firms to take it to the next level. Traditional asset allocations based honestly on historical data, and so now imagine if I could have as parameters or inputs, predicted returns, expected returns, historical returns, currency risk, supply chain risk, and each of them have different weights. And I can even add error correction and uncertainty as far as different parameters, and let the deep learning models and the neural networks uncover patterns I might not be aware of, because honestly, that's all we're trying to do is give a better tool. So originally you were the doctor with the stethoscope. Now I'm giving you an MRI machine. What's going to make a better diagnosis? I think the MRI machine may. And over time, as we get more and more data, we will get more and more accurate as well, because we can always almost think of it as like back testing our models in the past. Well, hey, we expected a 12% return. We had a range between 16 and 8, and we end up losing money. Well, obviously, okay, that was way off. But how can we adjust it constantly over time with the most recent, almost real-time type of data, and get out of this classic, allocation based historically on, historical data from 10 years ago. I mean, that's just, I think it's an opportunity for the visionary firms right now to really take a lead. But
just a short comment, again, expanding what you already said. I think a powerful paradigm is the one of running multiple models and seeking confirmation. It's almost like, in investment decision making, you either have a CIO or you have a committee. A committee from Switzerland, so we like these consensus decisions that they at least, and I think that's an important aspect, they would have looked at the problem from different perspectives and diversified the way given information is processed. I think that's a powerful and simple idea, because in the end you can take the average of the model's predictions, or you could have a genetic version of it where models that perform well are able to mutate and reproduce while others die. So I think that's something I would expect within that landscape that you are talking about.
Right, we're just creating augmented intelligence to make the committee to make more timely decisions based off of fact versus gut feel the way they've always done it. So, but I know we're running out of time, so I think there are a couple more questions left that we need to jump to.
Let's move to the next question. I think we have one more question to go. How will AI shape asset management over the next 10 years? Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know who wants to start. Anshul, you want to start? Given that you're in the AI NLP domain.
Sure thing. Yeah. I can. I will just look at the historical data and then try to extrapolate from there. So when we started Accern, I remember. So we got first client, which was a very large buy-side hedge fund. We went to the second very large buy-side hedge fund, and we were like, hey, we are doing lots of really cool NLP, and all these research papers that you see, we have actually implemented a good chunk of those, and we are quantifying a lot of this information. The request from there was, hey, don't give us these metrics. Can you just read all these documents and then tell us to buy a stock or to sell a stock? So literally the request at that time, like 5 years ago, at least where the industry was with regards to what their expectation from AI was, that can you just take something super raw and make a prediction and immediately. Today, we don't hear those kind of requests. People know that AI is not going to give you a golden bullet, right? It's a necessary but not sufficient condition to be successful. So you will need it to be successful, but does not mean that it is going to like justify your 20% like profit share there immediately. So that said, I think we are seeing now more reception, like companies like Accern and lots of these new novel technologies that are coming right from universities are getting better reception in this space. Lots of hedge funds are more open to adoption. With the migration to cloud, adoption of cloud, the barrier to innovate has also reduced. We are seeing lots of acceleration there. And I think if we are now extrapolate from here, we will see more and more firms utilizing a good chunk of unstructured information that they have, right? So there's a stats that 80% of enterprise data is unstructured, which is speech, text, images, and so on. And very few have really scraped that surface so far. And what today AI is providing an edge, we believe would become an essential commodity that they will have to have, right? So if you're going to make data-driven decisions in asset management, we believe every firm would require like these very, very advanced models, or I would say like advanced techniques to basically process all this information.
I totally agree with you, Anshul. I believe that AI for finance or asset management is still in early phase. There are a lot of things we can do, right? I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more and more automation in AI and NLP by leveraging machine learning, deep learning, reinforcement learning, and other smart algorithms. Again, I don't believe it's going to replace all human work, but it's going to help human to work more efficiently. Another thing in my mind is, we have been doing a lot of like text mining or image classification, image recognition. However, analyzing audio or video, right? I think a few companies have started doing that, but it's in very early phase, right? I think there's a potential and there's a lot of room to grow in that direction. New techniques, right, such as all kinds of deep learning algorithms, like there are new algorithms coming out every year, right? Some of them are good for solving specific problems. So I think that would be going still in the next few years. Anybody else like to share your thoughts?
Sure. So honestly, I think AI works on multiple fronts, from helping the portfolio managers and the CIO build more accurate and timely decisions, one, but look at the businesses that aren't possible. What if I could customize portfolios or asset management strategies for high wealth individuals based off their tax classification, their volatility, tolerance, all as options. It would be a huge value add at a business versus selling them a standardized box or a standardized approach. And I kind of look at it from that way. Even from the customer support perspective, I could leverage natural language processing and conversational AI, as one client is doing, to serve customers better in case their broker is on holiday that week and he doesn't really have anybody to deal with. The market's collapsing. He wants to talk to somebody now, right then. So I kind of look at it as what's possible. How do we take it to the next step? Again, not to replace people, but to make them more intelligent. And I think AI, or at least deep learning, gives that option a definite possibility.
I can't agree more, Bob. Well said. Matthias, any thoughts?
Yeah, sure.
Share? Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd like to maybe go back to what we said at the beginning, and that is the importance of, and you mentioned it several times, of having the human in the loop. I think the success of AI will depend on how well we succeed in convincing the users, the decision makers, the ones that should benefit from these technologies, and give them, a helping hand without them having to be computer scientists. I think being able to hide our complexity and open up an interface that people can actually understand, very much the same way that the success of the iPhone was built, right? That you can just grab it and get to know it. That for me would be, a key success factor in our industry.
It's just one last comment, because you bring it up, and I've dealt with these high frequency traders for such a long time. The number one thing they tell me is that quants are horrible programmers, that they're designing something, but it doesn't run well in the system, and that's why they only get 2 models, and that to get somebody who's an ideal candidate, they call a unicorn. They have to understand investment banking or portfolio management. They have to be a data scientist. They have to be a computer scientist. That's really tough.
I'm here to disagree with that. I am a quant and a
you're
computer scientist.
One of them. So. Yes,
Yeah,
you're
one
the
of them,
unicorn.
exactly.
There are just very few of them.
Very
and
true.
with your background, it looks like it's that perfect blends. And so that's actually one thing we tried to do, is leverage open source, abstract the complexities of the hardware, so that an IB person could actually brainstorm and design a model and go and accelerate it. And I think that's the real future, is to abstract the complexities of the hardware to make these things more feasible, so that they can analyze this plethora of data that they're focusing on.
Totally agree. Ioana, is there any last minute thoughts you want to share, or?
Well, you guys mentioned most, all of the things. I just want to add, for 10 years, I guess it's fairly short on the way to general artificial intelligence. So some people are optimistic and say that we'll have some of that, like 25% of having some real progress there by 2030. You know, that's up for discussion. So in terms of the next 10 years, I think certainly important role, a lot of progress to make in this area of general AI, but in the narrow sense, you already mentioned mostly automation. I would say scalability, I would add, in terms of data, types of data, and perhaps the speeds with which we can support decision makers.
Makes sense.
Wow. Thank you all. This has been amazing. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I know we could have gone on talking about this for hours because, you know, there's so many amazing perspectives here. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for sharing your perspectives today, and a special thank you to Ken for moderating and keeping us on track. That was awesome.
My
And
pleasure.
this virtual audience is giving you a huge virtual round of applause. Thank you again. For the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.